Hi, everybody. Yeah. In 1996, I was born with sickle cell anemia, the world's most foremost and at times most lethal genetic disease, according to the UN. And in talking to you today, I hope to share my story of this illness and change the way in which we engage with conversations around what I call the big black blood issue. Sickle cell is generational. It is given to us by our mothers, our grandmothers, and our great-grandmothers. Of course, it's also passed down through the male gene. I just like the sound of a matriarchy. It's a blood disorder, a mutation. It's caused by the unusual shape of my hemoglobin. In essence, instead of them being red and circle-like, they're the shape of a sickle. This means that it's harder for them to do what they're meant to do. They stick together and they hemolyze, which is then breaking down. When this occurs, it causes a lot of problems. It causes a sickle cell crisis. This causes chronic pain, extremely painful episodes that require hospitalization, organ damage, anemia, fatigue, injury to blood vessels, and pain in all different sorts of organs, kidney and liver failure. The list goes on. You see, it's a genetic illness. My father suffered from the AS trait. My mother suffered from the SC condition, which created me, an SS child. When looking at this in a very scientific way, which detaches emotion, what I have could easily be described as the negligent actions of my parents. But when understanding the decisions that we as human beings often make without full knowledge of the repercussions, it could also be described as young love just taking precedent over reason. Even though I'm a mutation, I see it as a gift in a way. So I spent a lot of time in hospital as a child. I was in and out consistently. My mother often spent the run-up to Christmas trying to convince doctors to let me go home and spend it with my family. As a formidable, strong-willed woman, she always won those fights, literally, like always. So my childhood was difficult, but the teens were also a very challenging time. In 2014, I was diagnosed with inflammatory bowel disease when I was meant to be sitting my A-levels. So I had to sit them the following year. 2015, A-levels came round again, but I was admitted to hospital. But this time I would sit them. However, I sat them in hospital. I sat my history A-level in hospital, the rest of them I sat at my school, but that didn't make them less challenging, let's not lie here. I had a severe sickle cell crisis in the rest of them too. From 2015 to 2016, I found out that I got into Warwick University. On the day I found out, I was in hospital, my usual place of residence. My mum had to come to the hospital and tell me that I got the results I needed to go to Warwick University to study law. From 2015 to 16, I had 12 admissions in hospital. On my first day of university, I developed arthritis symptoms for the first time. So now we have sickle cell, inflammatory bowel disease, and arthritis is a party. So in the summer, at 20 years old, I started a chemotherapy treatment called hydroxyurea. This means that it was meant to, get rid of the sickle cell problems. It was meant to bring it down a bit, but that wasn't really the case because this summer, after my sister had a liver transplant, she has her own situation. After she had her transplant, I became ill again. Since August, I've been in and out of hospital. On the day I finally built up the courage to apply to do this very TED talk, I was on the train to Guy's Hospital to have my very first EBT, an exchange blood transfusion, a procedure where up to 80% of my blood was taken from my body and 80% of donor blood was transfused into me in the hopes that this would reduce the effects of my sickle cell. So you may wonder why I'm telling you this story. You may wonder what I'm trying to achieve by telling you all of my challenges. Well, I've come to believe through my mum and more importantly my faith that what matters more than our problems themselves is the ways in which we choose to react to them. So it wasn't until my first year of university that I truly understood this principle. Whilst crouched under my bedroom table, crying about the isolation I was feeling due to my health, it suddenly dawned on me that there would be other people in this world that felt the exact same way I did. And when I realized that, I realized that my suffering could, if I allowed it to, produce joy in those people. And as bleak as that sounded, I was okay with that. So I began to engage in conversations. I began to talk about disability. I was speaking to everybody. I was all up in their face about sickle cell. I was like, look, this is what I have. Tell me what you have. How are we going to do something about this? I started to go to conversations about sickle cell, and not even just sickle cell, just the BME community, Black and ethnic minority community. I spoke about things like the ways that our community quite handles these issues in a very toxic way. Sometimes we just don't speak about it. When I spoke to people about my sickle cell, they told me that whilst they knew of somebody that had sickle cell, their friend or their family member had it, they just didn't really understand what it was. And that was a problem to me. Because when I spoke to people about cancer or Parkinson's or cystic fibrosis, those serious illnesses, everybody knew. Everybody could tell me the facts and all the numbers on those things, but nobody in the BME community could tell me about sickle cell. And that was a problem. I'll explain to you why soon. Growing older, I also learned that hydroxyurea would become very important in my treatment. As I grew older, I learned about the things that would be really important to me but would come with a cost. This medication that was important to me, being able to live and walk and breathe in this world as a person, came with a cost. I would have to pay for it. It was a chemotherapy treatment, and I'd never heard of a cancer patient being asked to pay for their chemotherapy. So that really confused me. I also learned a lot about blood donation. I learned why blood donation was instrumental to my health and success. It was something that I needed often. I also learned that as a woman in these spheres, as a Black woman with this condition, practitioners wouldn't listen to me. I would often have to completely say what I was saying over and over again to try and let them understand why I was going through pain and what was happening with me. Somebody else would always have to validate what I was saying about my health. I realized that whilst all health problems have their challenges, the ones to do with mine, sickle cell, came down to two things. Firstly, the level of silence in the BME community when it came to sickle cell. We weren't speaking about it, and that's a big problem. And it secondly came down to this issue of race. The demographic of the people that struggle with sickle cell mostly look the same. That's why I felt that it was being ignored. Sickle cell is in a lot of people. 15,000 people in the UK suffer from sickle cell disease. 300,000 babies annually worldwide are born with sickle cell. 20 to 25 million people are estimated to live with sickle cell disease in this world. So with those numbers, facts, and statistics, why do we as a community often go unnoticed? Why are our issues undermined and our feelings not noticed? This is a problem. This lack of awareness ultimately leads to a lack of government funding, and that leads to a lack of adequate treatment. Blood donation is so important when it comes to sickle cell. I've told you that before, and it's something that I must continuously reiterate. But when you look at the numbers, only 1% of BME people donate blood. So I put up polls on my Instagram and Facebook to try and find out why this was the case. But before I tell with you my findings, I would like to find out how many of you have donated blood before. Show of hands. Okay, you're all my friends, we're really close now. Okay, so the second question, how many of you have signed up to be an organ donor? Okay, that's a lot easier, you won't feel the pain, you're gone, so, cool. Okay, so from my results, I found that there were all different sorts of people. People weren't really that engaged in this issue. It came down to this feeling of otherness. People felt very disconnected. Those that were well felt that they had a completely different experience of life from those that were unwell, so I don't really need to think about it. But I'm going to split these groups up down into 4 groups of people. Firstly, there were those with needle phobia. They were not the biggest fan of needles, so they weren't going to give their blood. They were holding on to that thing. They said that, you know, like, I don't know how painful it's going to be. I don't really know if I want to do that. I'm not really sure. Then there was this second group of people. These were people that were just unaware. They didn't really know why blood donation was so critical. They didn't know how it would affect them, so they weren't really sure if they wanted to do it. They also said they weren't aware of this need of having BME donors. Why do black people need black blood? That was something I heard quite a lot. Then there was this third group of people. These were people that were medically exempt from giving blood, so I've got no problems with them. They said that, they had a baby, and after they had a baby, that meant that they had a blood transfusion, and after they had that transfusion, they could no longer give blood. There were also those with pre-existing medical conditions. That meant they could not give blood. But lastly, they were gay men, so because of gay sex, they weren't allowed to give blood. But there was this last group, the fourth group. This group really upset me because these were people that had taken the time. They had tried to sign up to be donors, but there weren't the things in place for them to be able to do so. They were put on waiting lists, and that shocked me. I didn't understand how we could have such a deficit in blood donation, but when people tried to give blood, there were not the facilities for them to do so. That's something I believe must be addressed. But all in all, this deficit and lack of awareness of blood donation really came down to massive things to me. The lack of awareness of sickle cell and BME health in the UK really came down to this issue of race. And that's what I'm going to speak about today. How the NHS and government engage with BME health. Sickle cell has a black face. African, Caribbean, Middle Eastern, Eastern Mediterranean, and Asian origin. These are the people that are more likely to have this disorder. 1 in 4 West Africans are carriers of sickle cell, whereas 1 in 100 Northern Greeks are. Half of the 300,000 babies annually born with sickle cell are Nigerian alone. That's where I'm from. So there is this lack of engagement because of this demographic. It's very hard to see any other reason why people wouldn't be engaging in these problems. Sickle cell is pervasive within our society. I've told you the numbers. 15,000 people in the UK deal with this disorder. So why was there this disconnect? A 2018 all-party parliamentary group student research report found that when looking at the people that were willing to engage in BME, when looking at the student nurses and new practitioners, only 71% of them said that they had any formal education on sickle cell. The report also went on to say that only 26% of those student nurses and midwives said that they would feel comfortable enough to deal with a patient with sickle cell. 26%. So this revealed to me that for some reason, people weren't engaging in this. And while I may not be able to share the experience of every sickler, I can draw from my own experience. I'll never forget the time where in the middle of the night, my mum had to come to the hospital to fight the doctors that was on call and tell them that they should give me the painkillers I needed to help my pain. This completely unsolicited and unjustified fear that giving me, a black woman, drugs would somehow turn me into a drug addict completely outweighed the need for health practitioners to manage somebody's pain. That night, I was lucky. My mum lived 5 minutes away from the hospital, and she came there. She fought for me. But that is not the situation that every sickler goes through. I've heard the cries of women in their 50s on bays asking for painkillers and being refused, again, based on this completely unsolicited and unfounded fear that giving somebody these drugs will turn them into a drug addict. There are no facts, there is no data, there is nothing to show that this is the case. Black people and people that suffer with sickle cell are not more likely to become addicted to these painkillers than any other sort of condition. So why is this the way that health practitioners are dealing with their patient? Another thing comes down to the way in which sickle cell is being underfunded. In England, 10,000 people suffer from cystic fibrosis, compared to the 15,000 people that suffer from sickle cell anemia. However, cystic fibrosis garners up to 30 times more financial support than sickle cell disorders. 1 in 1,900 of all babies born have the sickle cell disorder in the UK. So with those numbers and facts, why is essential treatment being denied? With those numbers, why are these communities of people being ignored? Why are their stories not being heard? And why are they not being taken care of when it comes to the NHS? Why are their problems not being seen as a priority? And why are they being underfunded? Essential treatment when it comes to sickle cell patients is denied. We have to pay for our prescriptions. I am under a chemotherapy treatment, hydroxyurea. Even though it comes in the form of pill and not the usual form, I'm made to pay for that. But I've never heard of anybody being made to pay for a chemotherapy treatment other than a sickle cell patient. Hydroxyurea is critical in prolonging the life of sickle cell patients. It stops really, really bad, severe sickle cell crises from occurring. So why are we as a community being made to pay for the right to be able to live? Just to breathe, to stop acute chest syndrome, a type of crisis that I've actually heard of that kills a lot of its patients. Just to be able to walk, to stop a hip replacement from happening at 26 years old, which is the story of somebody I've met. These are the bare necessities, but for some reason there is a tag when it comes to this. I believe this comes down to the demographic of people that are suffering from this illness. There is a lack of consideration. Cystic fibrosis affects 10,000 in the UK. Sickle cell, 15,000. We have to really think about why this is the case. To conclude, I have 3 suggestions about how we can move forward and change the way in which sickle cell is being dealt with. Firstly, petitions. There is one up right now which is trying to get us to not have to pay for prescription prices, for prescription payments. This is a simple way of lending your voice. Just sign. You can be the best ally, but by simply putting your name down. And that shows the government that you care about this issue. That shows the House of Parliament that you want to be part of changing policy. In this way, for this community of people that exist within your community. Another suggestion is blood donation. Blood donation is invaluable. I've said it once, I will say it again, I will say it on the day I die. Blood donation is everything. I would not be here without it. That's a matter of fact. When I asked people why they weren't giving blood, it really came down to this otherness and this feeling that it was not their issue. But what sickle cell has taught me that there is a connection that goes between all of us, and it's so much more than you could ever imagine. There are countless donors, phlebotomists, doctors, hematologists, and so many more, nurses, the list goes on. People that have played an instrumental part in my life. They are the nameless heroes of my story. Without it, without them, and them giving of themselves, I would not be here. This culture of ignorance within the BME community is something I must address. When I spoke to people about the need for Black people to give blood for sickle cell patients, they were often confused as to why Black people needed Black donors. And really it comes down to the fact that when you have somebody that is more closely matched to you and comes from the same group of people, your blood is more similar. Simply said, that's it. That means the blood donation will have a higher likelihood of success. Therefore, a rise in BME donors is critical. Currently, 1% of BME people donate blood. That equals 10,000 donors. But we need 40,000. Therefore, a rise is needed right now. Organ donation is another way in which you can help this problem. If you're scared of needles, give your organs. You're not going to feel it like right now. Like, it's a long way ahead, don't worry. Like, give your organs. And that's another way in which you can help the sickle cell community. We need organs too. Blood donation and organ donation. These are fundamental ways in which you can help this group of people. So make groups, go out, go to the blood places, find out if you can donate. Lastly, I want to encourage conversation. Storytelling, I believe, is one of the best vehicles of information. When I tell people my story, they listen. And more importantly, they respond and ask questions. So I hope to build a bridge today so you can see that our fight is your fight. We are not going to leave this world untouched. Life takes no prisoners. So today it may be me, but tomorrow it could be any one of you. If ever there was a time where you needed something that you did not have within yourself, wouldn't you like to know that there is somebody who has taken the time to sit down, give of themselves so that you may be able to live as yourself tomorrow? I would. And I'm eternally grateful to those that have sat down and given themselves their blood so many times for me to be here tomorrow and live my life as myself. So, with that, I'd like to say that I hope this conversation has helped facilitate a more constructive conversation around BME health, and I hope that it instigates a change. I hope the feeling of compassion that you leave here with today becomes a movement and an action, so we can change the way in which policy is engaging with BME health, so we can change the numbers when it comes to the lack of donors in the BME community, so we can change the way in which we see the big black blood issue. Thank you very much.